This presentation, titled ISO 9001 APG, Auditing Statutory Regulatory Requirements, and ISO 9001, comes to us from Joana dos Guimaraes Sa. Joana is co-convener of the ISO 9001 Auditing Practices Group, an informal group of ISO TC 176 that provides practical advice, examples, and technical background to third-party QMS auditors on how to conduct audits. She represents Portugal as an expert at Working Group 1 of ISO TC 279 on innovation management, which is the working group responsible for the development of ISO 5602-2019 Innovation Management Systems Guidance and the forthcoming requirements standard ISO 56001. Her participation on the normative framework for innovation goes back to 2006 with the development of the Portuguese standards for innovation. Joana is Executive Development Director at APSER, a Portuguese certification body. In this position, she oversees the development of new services and technical updating of existing ones in the fields of management systems, products, services, and process certification. Quality management systems, innovation management systems, sustainable forest management, and chain of custody are areas of her direct technical responsibility. She has been working in the certification business since 1998 and has been an auditor since 1994. She is currently a lead auditor for ISO 9001, ISO 14001, Innovation Management, Forest Management, and Chain of Custody for FSC and PEFC. And with that, take it away, Joana.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about auditing statutory and regulatory requirements in quality management systems. This is a paper that is being currently under revision on ISO 9001 APG. But before entering the main theme, I'm going to make a brief presentation of who is ISO 9001 APG. So ISO 9001 APG, it's a group of informal experts that were drawn from the Technical Committee 176, the technical committee in ISO that handles ISO 9001 standard. And that was created in 2000, back in 2000, when the new standard was launched, and its primary focus was to reflect a process-based approach that was essential for auditing organizations' conformity against the requirements of ISO 9001. And in that time, it was quite needed to train the auditors and to focus on the process-based approach, moving from the 20-clause standard. This work is still relevant. We feel we still need to focus on the process-based approach, also on the risk-based approach, and the papers were all very popular. So our work takes the form of papers that are freely available in the website. I leave you here the link to the website. Our aim is to address challenges in auditing, because we feel that having a standard that is applicable to all kind of organizations in any size around the world, with different complexities, with different products and services, in different cultures, with different problems, using a standard to audit that is also applicable not only to ISO 9001, but all management system standards. And to ensure that we are all aligned and that we can reach equivalent conclusions no matter what we're auditing, it's a challenge. And so we need to share good practices, to address problems we identify, to discuss these issues, and to share it with the community. So, and the papers have always been very popular, so the group keeps on moving. How do we work? We work as an informal group. Anyone can identify the need to revise an existing paper or making a new paper. We expose our different views. We work for consensus, and we are not representing an official position. We're not producing standards. We are sharing good practices and examples. We are not even an industry benchmark, and our papers are not definitive, and they may not be applicable to all situations. So, and we don't take any responsibility for any errors, omissions, or other liabilities that may arise from our information. We don't pretend to have the ultimate information on how to audit a specific clause or a specific process. For this paper is currently under review, so it is not published yet. The content I'm going to present may be different from the final paper, and this presentation also reflects my personal views, so it's not an official presentation of ISO 9001 APG. By the way, we used to be APG, we are now ISO 9001 APG because another APG, another auditing practices group was created by ISO 14001. So let's go to the basic. In ISO 9001, an organization that adopts the standard needs to demonstrate that it is able to conform to the statutory, regulatory, and customer requirements that are applicable to its products and services, to the ones that they included in the scope of these quality management systems. So the organization needs first to identify the statutory and regulatory requirements, to determine which ones are applicable to the products and services needed, to implement the processes needed to be able to consistently provide products and services that meet them, and be able to demonstrate they can provide them. So that's the work and the responsibility of the organization, and that is what the auditor is going to audit and to verify. What happens is that as we apply the standard to very different contexts, in very different regions, in very different sectors, statutory and regulatory requirements may have very different complexities, may have very different dynamics. Some are always changing, others not so much, and they may relate with different elements of the QMS. So, of course, the scope, it's the products and services, but when we go to service, it's not obvious which elements of the QMS relate to the services, and not always the products also. So we also have to be aware to which audit criteria in ISO 9001 are we going to compare, and are we going to evaluate that the organization can comply with them. This is, and we need to remember that auditors need to be to have the adequate competence to audit a quality management system, and that is the subject of ISO 17021-3 that defines the requirements for bodies providing audit and certification of management systems. So. One specific thing is that auditor needs to have knowledge and understanding of statutory and regulatory requirements that are relevant to the organization. So it is our job to keep updated, to have this knowledge, to understand how they apply in the organization, and to keep this knowledge updated. What are statutory and regulatory requirements? Well, they are very difficult to pronounce, especially when you're not a native English speaker, but mainly they are mandatory requirements for your products and services. The difference is that statutory requirements are specified by a legislative body, while the regulatory requirements are specified by an authority that is mandated by a legislative body. So depending on the regions you are, on the countries you are, you will have your own regulatory requirements and your own statutory requirements. So definitions can be found in ISO 9000-2015 and in many standards other than 9001, and even in the note in 9001, they can be referred as legal requirement. In ISO 9001, we like to keep them differentiated. This is relevant because this will take us directly to the source, to the interested party that can impact the the organization that is implementing ISO 9001, and that will issue requirements to your products and services. So here it's, I think for example, examples of regulatory requirements are food agencies, the communication regulator, the medicine authorization bureau, etc. So there are many examples that you have to look in the region of the organization that is being audited, or the region to whom, the country to whom they are exporting the products and services. Here are some examples of differences. For example, in the manufacture of helmets for bikes, you have a statutory requirement for personal safety equipment, laws for personal safety equipment. At the regulatory level, you will have maybe in some economic zones the need to have a specific product certification. For example, if you go to the other example, the legal service firm, you will have the national laws for legal representation, while at the regulatory level, you will need to be registered in a local lawyer bar association, and you will need to apply legal codes at place for that region, for example, for that local government for litigation, for example. Auditors at preparation stage, and even within their competence, need to know which are the interested parties that can define applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. This becomes more challenging when the organization exports to different regions, and there the auditors might not be so aware. So they need at preparation stage to identify these markets and to do their homework. So in order when they go to the audit, they can compare if the organization is doing this work properly, and challenge the organization to demonstrate this. These are a few. Now I'm going to move and we're going to explore this thing about the market later, but what is the complexity about statutory and regulatory requirements related to products and services, and then related to the boundaries of products and services that nowadays are not so clear anymore. So you have product specifications, you have test methods for products, you have requirements very frequently for monitoring and measurement activities related with packaging of products, with the preservation of products, related with labeling of products, with information related to the product, with claims that can be done in the product, with training of authorizations in others. If you move to services, you have many requirements related with service characteristics, with monitoring and measurement activities. It is very frequent to find regulatory requirements related with service levels when you, for example, give a concession to a water supply or to the energy supply with capacity. So it is also very usual to have regulatory requirements that define response times, and less obvious are the requirements that are frequently defined to service related with infrastructure and resources, and that are defined by law or by regulatory, and that don't come so apparent to the auditors as applicable requirements to the products and services. We need also to remember that there are consumer rights, there are warranty requirements, there are requirements that address the process of delivery, for complaint, for response time. And also very important, for example, if you go to services, to health services, to schools and others, you have requirements for the qualification of personnel. And for example, like the example on the legal services we gave a moment ago. When you go to the product characteristics, in the traditional mind, maybe because of my age, in the traditional, we tend to think of product characteristics related with the performance of the product, with the characteristics of the product. Nowadays, more and more, there are statutory or regulatory requirements that address things that are related, for example, with environmental requirements that address environmental concerns, with life cycle, with disposition, with the origin of materials. So we see a lot of concerns regarding environment coming in the requirements for the products and services, and that will be very relevant when you audit, for example, the design and development process, or the planning of production process. Classically, many of them relate with the performance of the product and the safety of the user. So, to sum up, statutory and regulatory requirements represent society requirements and usually address things related to safety, to trust, confidence by the user, reliability, and main concerns of the society. And therefore, they are part of the requirements we have to check for the organization. But we can never forget that there are also the customer requirements and the requirements that the organization voluntarily wants to address and to claim in their products and services. So when we make an audit, we are always taking samplings because we have a limited time to do that, and we have to sample how the organization identifies these requirements and complies with them. So we have to take samples of requirements. We should use a risk-based approach. Of course, that the factors that we consider risk are the ones that will raise more concern, either because of the impact they can have on the user of the product or the services, either because of the risk of not being well addressed by the organization. And the auditor should take a balance between statutory requirements, regulatory, and customer requirements and other requirements applicable to the products and services. Here, I think a word for standards, it's very important, because when you go to regulatory requirements, frequently standards are referred. Standards are by nature voluntary. You don't, ISO, for example, creates standards that are applicable on a voluntary basis. When a regulatory scheme refers a standard, the standard becomes mandatory, and that is frequently the case for mandatory product certification. And here in the PowerPoint, you see some examples of harmonized standards that are become mandatory. This implies that the auditors need to be always updating their knowledge on applicable standards for that technical area where they are qualified. That means, for example, in an audit team, maybe not all auditors in an ISO 9000 audit team have the technical area competence, but the ones that will ensure the technical area will need to keep updated on which are the applicable standards that may become mandatory, and that if they have been revised. Talking a little bit more about product certification. Many products need to be certified on a mandatory basis, and some will only require self-declaration that can be done by, for example, testing a prototype and then making a self-declaration. And in product certification, you have many different forms of product certification. You may only test a prototype. You may take some regular samplings of the product to test. You may also verify the production control associated, for example, with ISO 9000 itself. You may be performing the audit combined with the product certification audit or the product certification may be provided by another CV or audited by another team. So that will give, if a company has a product certification by an accredited body, you have to trust that the job is well done. So you may trust that many part of the audit covering the legal requirement for product certification is covered. But if, for example, the product certification doesn't imply the control of production, maybe you have to audit this control of production to see if the claim that this prototype is being consistently being produced according to the certified prototype is being well done. So you need to be aware of the forms of product certification to know if you can rely a lot on it, or if you need during the audit to check other critical points in the control of production. Another thing that is very important, and that is currently in our paper, and that will be kept, it's that we need to differentiate that we are not auditing an organization for compliance, and that this is very important because of liability. Many organizations may, when, for example, they have a problem with legal authorities, may, but we are audited and certified against ISO 9001, we comply with statutory and regulatory compliance. We're not doing compliance. We're not stating that the organization, because it has an ISO 9001 and identify all legal requirements, is able to state that it is compliant all the time. We know that we are reaching a substantiation conclusion that they can demonstrate its ability to consistently provide. They know how to identify the requirements, how to put them in their specification, how to provide the services, and it is reasonably to expect that they know how to, and they can demonstrate they meet applicable requirements. But of course, they can have non-conforming products. They can have services that are provided and are not okay. The requirements can change, and they may not be able to provide them all the time. I can be a good driver and fulfill the code for driving every time, but maybe one day I skip a red light, or I'm not always compliant. So this is very important, and it is also important that the auditors know they are not making claims of compliance, either because it is the organizational responsibility to ensure legal compliance. So we need to avoid statements of fact about legal compliance, and to avoid becoming liable for any responsibility. We check this for legal compliance, so you're legal, and we're not doing this job. And this is one other thing that we have been discussing in the group about this paper, is that you need to look at the local legislation, and if you're a third-party auditor, to check with your CB. What are the confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements you need when checking, for example, when saying that in a report that an organization is not compliant for legislation? Because depending on the regions, for example, if you find a very critical issue related to health and safety, depending on the local legislation, in some countries you may need to report this to authorities. In other, you're doing a job and you have a non-disclosure agreement, and it's not your obligation to report on anything of this, and the CB will only report anything of this if compelled by law. So you need to verify this with the CB with whom you're working and with your local legislation. Another thing that is relevant and that the auditors should avoid is to, during an ISO 9000 audit, to be making statements of fact about things not related with KMS scope, for example, with compliance with legal, with environmental things about the operations that do not concern the products and services, or with health and safety that you see and you're probably shocked. One thing is sure, if you're auditing an organization and the safety for you, it's not good, you can interrupt an audit and say, I cannot proceed with this audit because there's no safety conditions for me to be in this organization. But it is not your work to report on health and safety when you audit ISO 9001. So one thing that moves you away from this liability, and that is focus on your work, you're auditing the organization for conformity with ISO 9001, is that all audit evidence shall be compared with ISO 9001-2015 and not with the legal requirement. For example, a company is not fulfilling a legal requirement for a product and it released a product. The non-conformity is addressed to 8.6 of the standard and not to the legal requirement. The evidence is maybe the legal requirement that is not being fulfilled, but the non-conformity is with 8.6. The same with customer communication. For example, if the organization did not respond to the complainer in the required legal time. So now let's just explore, I think we still have some minutes, the requirements of statutory and regulatory requirements and how they can mix with different elements of ISO 9001 and 2015. The first one, and this will be a must in all audits, is of course determining needs and expectations from interested parties. Who are the regulators? Who issues legal requirements for this organization? Have they properly identified them? Have they properly identified the statutory and regulatory requirements they determined? Do they monitor them properly? If they are very dynamic and always issuing new requirements, are they keeping updated on this or not? Processes are the basis of audit, and in fact, what we do when we audit, it's to audit the process. So we verify through the audit to the process conformity to all applicable requirements. What we need to be aware is that in some cases, in some sectors, there are requirements that apply to the processes themselves. For example, service level agreements for the provision of water or energy, production of medicine and medical devices, where many codes of practices determine requirements for the processes themselves and the way they are being conducted, and for example, for food safety also. Infrastructure is a kind of tricky clause to audit. We audit, for example, we audit organizations where they are operating normally. We audit the infrastructure, if the infrastructure is adequate, if it fulfills the requirement, if maintenance is done. And we do it a lot visually and auditing the process for maintaining the facilities and the equipment. But for example, for many service companies, many requirements are done for the infrastructure itself, but we're not auditing the infrastructure when it is being built. But depending on the scope of the quality management system, and these infrastructures may change, and so auditors should be particularly aware of changes. And they will need to revise. Maybe there are new statutory and regulatory requirements they have to fulfill, and auditors should be aware of this. It's very frequent that organizations appear with a new infrastructure to be included in the scope of the certificate when they should after they have built it, when they should plan for changes and include these changes in the quality management system and it would be the work of the auditor to audit at this stage. Okay, when we go to the requirements for products and services, many of the statutory and regulatory requirements may have been previously determined by the organization, but it may be the case that their customers would ask for different requirements if they go for different markets, and that is very important. Also, we talked earlier about identifying statutory and regulatory requirements on different markets where they operate, and maybe this is where the auditor also needs to go to the contracts and what was agreed with the customer, who is able to identify the statutory and regulatory requirements and to control them. You need to be aware of these, and also what are the claims they do in data sheets for the products, catalogs, websites, and so on. Design and development, well, this is for excellence the place where organizations will identify the requirements they will have to fulfill for a new product or for a new service. One of the claims many organizations do, especially the ones that want to state they don't need to apply design and development, is that, legal requirements say everything about my product. I don't need to develop anything else. This is not an argument for not applying design and development process. Maybe some products or services are quite simple and don't need a big design, but it's not for the fact that everything is regulated that doesn't need to be designed. Like in processes, some sectors have applicable regulations to design a product or a service and need to undergo certain stages, to have certain qualifications for the people that make the design, to make certain verification and validation stages that have to comply with certain regulations. That is the case of medicine, for example, the obvious one. When you talk about control of externally provided processes, products, and services, well, you're on the other side now as provider as a client, and so you will need to be aware of what legal requirements they might need to guarantee you they will control. So as an auditor, you need to address this issue either with the agreements and contracts that the organization has with suppliers, the purchase auditors, how they audit, eventually if they have quality plans, how they do receiving inspection, etc. So what you need to be sure is that the organization that you're auditing ensures that the applicable statutory and regulatory requirements for the products and services are determined, knowledge, managed, and ensured by the supplier, and that the organization has an adequate control of them. So I don't think we need to lose a lot of time talking about the production and service provision, because here is by definition where you will look more at the applicable requirements for the products and services, how they are controlled, and that addresses all the things that are handled in this clause. The control. There are more and more legal requirements related with property, and for example, I'm thinking about data protection of the customers. Identification and traceability is frequently in many sectors defined by legal requirement. Preservation also in many products, changes and post-delivery activities. So of course, in product release and non-conforming products, because these are critical points where in the quality management system, we verify that the organization demonstrates its ability to deliver conforming products that meet requirements. basically, of course, in monitoring and measurement activities, internal audits, management review, improvement, even at leadership, even at planning, we have the issue of statutory and regulatory requirements and other requirements that you need to see how the organization is verifying and can demonstrate that ensures adequate control and improves when things are not okay. So to conclude, statutory and regulatory requirements are part of the applicable requirements for the products and services. And a management system audit is not a verification of compliance and does not imply a statement of full compliance by the organization. It wouldn't be reasonable. And the work of the auditor is to reach an effective audit conclusion on the demonstrated ability of the organization to provide products and services that conform with statutory and regulatory requirements and other requirements, of course. So if you have inquiries, if you think we need to address anything more at this paper or other papers, feedback from user is very welcome in the auditing practices group. In fact, for example, the revision of this paper was mandated by an inquiry done by an external member. And you can send your comments on the papers or presentations to Charles Corey, that is acting as secretary of the group. And here is this email. Thank you in the name of the Auditing Practices Group team, all our members, we thank the Exemplar Global for this opportunity to present our work, and to the listeners for all your interest in this. And so I hand over. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Joana dos Guimaraes Sa, for that perspective on the ISO 9001 Auditing Practices Group. And that concludes this presentation.